farms has enjoyed enormous profits.
People make cereals, Monsanto makes chemical, anyone who manufactures
everybody around the farm.
Everyone around the farm had record profits last year. And the Canadian farmers' profits were the lowest they've ever been in the history. Worse than in the Depression. We weren't negative in the Depression. You can see on the average in that graph, but we're negative $20,000 on average, $20,000 on average for the average farm.
It's definitely a threat to the family farm. You know, I guess just in my life, a 50-acre farm used to be a large farm in this particular township. Today, if you're not working a minimum of 250 to 300 acres, forget it. And even then, you'd have to have a job outside the farming community.
On an actual farm where they're growing crops outside greenhouses, that there is a problem. I mean, we read about it all the time in the paper. Soybeans were getting $7.50 a bushel 20 years ago, and fuel cost this much, and now soybeans are getting $6.50.
Had we not had chemicals in the last, especially in the last 20 years, a lot of farmers would not have been able to exist. Two things would have happened. The weed population would increase, which would make the yields decrease, and with the pricing problems that we've had in the last, especially the last 4 years, people would have lost their farms, no question about it. But everything, it's not just the chemical side, it's it's the hybrids, it's the advent, it's just, there's been such a change in the agricultural fields that it's mind-boggling, really. But all of these things are all part of the economics that make it work today.
But today you wouldn't be able to make a go on a farm as a standalone. You would have to have a second income or you wouldn't survive. You literally wouldn't. With the cost of the machinery, the cost of the land, farming is very prohibitive today. And that's probably what fed the birth of the factory farms, the industrialization of the farming community. The multinationals literally took over farming and have industrialized it.
In our case, we used to have tobacco, we had chickens, we had cattle, we had all of these things. So everybody was part of the operation. Everybody needed to be part of the operation to make it happen. But we only had about 75 acres, 100 acres for quite a while. And then we grew to about 300 acres. And today, well, I made a decision 2 years ago to drop it because I couldn't make enough money to make it worthwhile.
There are so many unpredictable conditions that can affect the financial well-being of farmers. Everything from weather to the markets.
When you're talking about farmers and stress, the weatherman has a lot that causes you a lot of stress. Believe it or not, but people in the city wouldn't realize that. But you get a dry spell and a drought, and you need rain, and your crops are shriveling up, and you got no water to put on them. That is stress. It is very stressful. That and the markets are very stressful, especially more today than they were a number of years ago.
I can remember my grandparents listening to the radio when they were having lunch or at breakfast to find out the price of soybeans and the price of corn.
Sure. We're stressful over that because if the price wasn't good enough, you're high enough, what are you going to do?
Well, it's not an Ontario problem, it's a worldwide problem. Like, it seems that it's a real paradox that you have so many people in the world starving, and yet we can't make a living with the materials that we grow here because there's just no need for it. To the point where we're using it for fuel rather than for food. So it just seems ridiculous that that's happening, but that's exactly what's happening. And I think the only reason that's happening is because of the world conditions. And you have the superpowers like the U.S., especially at this point. France is another one. Like Europe as a whole has a very heavy subsidized agricultural program, and we cannot compete with that. As much as we increase yields and are efficient, in the end you can only produce so many bushels per acre, and if the price is not there, there's just not enough income to pay the expenses.
Young people are finding it increasingly difficult to enter into farming or to take over their families' farms. According to a recent survey of farmers in the Essex and Kent area, only a very small percentage of their children, now in grade 12, intend to go follow in their parents' footsteps and pursue farming as a career. 84% intend to leave farming altogether and to seek other careers.
So to substantiate the investment I had for the revenue I was getting, I said, no, can't happen. So I let it go. And of course, my sons will never have the opportunity now to go back because the investment would be tremendous to get back in, even at that level.
When you see these auctions of very, very successful farmers that are my age, our age, and whatever, and that their families aren't taking it over, that this next generation coming up isn't doing that anymore. What have we done and what have we changed to make that dynamic happen?
By Statistics Canada, the average age of the Canadian farmer is 62.
Wow.
And they're losing money every year. So they're probably going to want to retire at 65. So if 50% of your industry disappears in 3 years, ask any politician, they don't know what to do about it. They don't have a clue what's going to happen.
We don't have a crystal ball to tell us what the future holds for farming in southwestern Ontario. We know that the climate is changing, and scientists predict that the growing season may become hotter and longer, but with more extreme weather conditions and droughts, negative consequences are expected to outweigh the positive.
Winter's warmed up.
You're growing season.
Well, every winter. We put corn in the last of April, the last 2 or 3 years, and that was unheard of, right? And it's not, I mean, I can remember it in '67, Barb and I went to California, and the last week in February, the first week in March, it was below zero all the time we were gone, and it was below zero for another week or better after we come home. That's Fahrenheit, not Celsius.
And our dependency on fossil fuels is becoming increasingly costly, not only in terms of the environment, but also in terms of food production.
Basically right now what's happening in this part of Ontario is survival. These guys, they've had about 3 bad years in a row. So besides the weather, they got so many other things that they have no control over. Fuel costs, which is just, think of the dynamic of what's happened to you as you drive your car. And this guy, he relies on machinery that takes a significant amount of petrochemical to keep it running. Whether it's the oils and the oil changes and the greases and all that, everything keeps on going up. And the cost of the fuel, that doesn't go away.
It has been estimated that 10 calories of hydrocarbon energy are required to produce 1 calorie of food, when taking into account the energy needed for agricultural chemicals, fuel for farm equipment, and transportation. The World Watch Institute estimates that food travels an average of 1,500 miles before it reaches our dinner tables, up 25% from 20 years ago. Many farmers support a shift back to producing food for local markets. This might also serve to better protect the customer.
One of the strange things that's happening now is we allow importation of products from all these countries where we know they don't have pesticide regulations, and we know that companies like Monsanto and different firms like that are selling these same products that have been banned in North America, that these people are spraying on their crops, and then we're allowing those crops to be imported and sold on our stores because of the cheap price involved with them. It's a serious issue.
The no-till method of crop production may also save on energy, chemical use, and cost.
So now they've gone to a system where they actually leave that trash on the field. They don't do that amount of plowing. They go in and they plant right back over that again with this new equipment they've been able to develop. And it means a lot less time on the land, a lot less soil compaction, which is always a problem when you're running bigger and heavier machinery on it. So it's a lot less fuel cost per acre, a lot less labor cost per acre, because you don't have your man and machinery out there constantly on the field. Several times a year you've eliminated a few of those things.
Some farmers' groups are urging governments to fund independent agricultural research, including research into affordable organic methods, as well as to provide assistance to farmers making the transition into organic production. While the demand for organically grown foods is on the rise, it's not without its drawbacks for those actually doing the farming.